So maybe before I open it, I'll give a brief description of its history to my understanding. Like I said, I'm not extremely familiar with this. Obviously, I'm not very familiar with Amstrad in general, but Amstrad is a company in the UK. They're a British-based company that, for the most part, made computers, and they had pretty good success with their personal computers, especially the CPC line. But in the 90s, of course, the consoles started to become more popular, and basically Amstrad thought, hey, we have our computer line, they're doing pretty good, we have a lot of games for these computers, they're doing pretty good. So they basically took one of the CPC computers and consoleized it, okay? Basically removed the keyboard, removed the tape drive, you know, made it exclusively cartridge based, made some special controllers for it, and called it a day. Commodore did the same thing with the Commodore 64. They had I think it was called the C64 GS, and you can almost argue the 5200 was just 600 XL without a keyboard. You know, basically strip it down, take off the keyboard, take off the computer parts, and call it a game console. Seemed like a good idea. They were pretty popular already. The kind of people that already owned the Amstrad computers weren't necessarily going to buy this system, because all the games they had on the computer were essentially the same games that were going to be on this system. So the only people that were going to buy this system were the people that were already into consoles. And they put pretty decent advertising into this, but it just wasn't going to compete with Nintendo and Sega. Another problem is this came out in 1990 in the UK and in Europe, but that's the same year that Sega came out with the Mega Drive. So now this was going up against the 16-bit Sega Mega Drive. This is still only 8-bit. Yes, it was more powerful than the NES, and at the time they kind of saw this as competition for the NES and the Sega Master System. And this is a little bit better than those systems in that its clock speed's a little bit faster. I think it can do more hardware sprites. It can do more colors on screen. It has a huge color palette to pick from. And obviously, being only 8-bit, it wasn't going to compete with the Mega Drive. And once again, Sega had a following. They had all the arcade hits. And, you know, the console fans just weren't going to come over to this system with a limited amount of games. And the computer owners, like I said, weren't going to buy this system because they could get the same games on their computer for, in some cases, a third or a fifth the price. A lot of the games that were on this system were just ports of the Amstrad CPC games, and you could get those games on cassette or disc, which were a lot cheaper than cartridges. So, like I said, in some cases, are you going to pay up to 5 times more to have the game on a cartridge than what you can pay to have it on the computer that you already own? Obviously, the people that own Amstrad computers were not going to buy this system. Needless to say, it was a commercial failure. They only sold 15,000 of these things, which is absolutely, you know, peanuts compared to the Master System, the NES, or the Mega Drive. But nonetheless, it came out in 1990, and technically it wasn't that bad. It certainly was an improvement over the NES and the Master System. And like I said, for them, for Amstrad, it wasn't really a huge stretch. It doesn't take a lot of effort to simply port or consoleize the computer. You know what I mean? So, let's see if we can open this right. This way. Now, this is the manual for it. Obviously it's in multiple languages, so it looks pretty big, but it's actually only a few pages. Basically how to hook it up to either a TV or a monitor. So we have the system itself. Arguably a very ugly system. Very unique. Looks like a spaceship maybe. But they went a little crazy with the ports. They really should have simplified this, because you essentially have 2 controller ports, but then you have this port, which is for special analog controllers, and then you have this port, which is for the light gun. Could they not have made just 2 controller ports that could also use analog controllers or the light gun? It just seems like too much going on at the front here. And once again, coming from a computer, You know, on a computer it's okay to have a million ports on the back, but when you're making a console you want to simplify that. On the back, same thing. We have multi-AV out for the monitor, which just basically, as far as I know, has the RGB in it. And then we have, of course, the SCART connector. And of course the SCART has the composite and the RGB and the sound in it. Then we have the RF, channel selection obviously. And oddly enough, 2 DC power jacks, and I can't quite figure this one out myself because it runs off of one power adapter, and as you can see that's the European 220 volt, I guess it is, or 240 volt, I can't remember, input 240 volt, but obviously that's of no use to me, but hopefully I can find something that's 11 volt 0.5 amp output, which isn't too uncommon, I suppose. And it's just a standard barrel plug, so that plugs into this one. Essentially that's all you need to power the system. So I'm not too sure what this one's for, because this one's 5 volts DC and it goes to the monitor. So is that just to turn the monitor on when the system turns on, or to turn the system on when the monitor turns on, or some strange thing like that? As far as I know, it's not necessary. You only need this one to run the system. But the other troubling thing is, of course, I'm going to have to try and find, along with a PAL to NTSC converter, which for the love of God, I know I've been saying I'm going to get, as soon as possible now, a PAL to NTSC converter, but I'm also going to need a SCART cable that will give me composite video in the stereo. So I'm sure that exists, I'm just going to have to find it. I don't know about using RF. I don't know how I would use RF if it's PAL. Maybe someone can explain that to me. But I'm assuming it's going to be even more difficult to use RF. I'd be better off to just try and find a SCART to composite video cable. But like I said, there's a lot going on the front and back of this thing. But on the top it's pretty simple. Power, pause. At least I'm assuming that's pause. It certainly looks like a pause button to me. And the cartridge slot. When you turn it on, it locks the cartridge in. Here's the controllers for it. They're extremely simple. There's no start and select. It's just a 1, 2, and a D-pad. The D-pad and the buttons to me feel like a TurboGrafx 16 controller or PC Engine controller. It's about the same size and it kind of has a similar... Well, actually it's more like a Famicom controller. Looks like it's going to lock into the side of the system or something, but of course it doesn't. So, I mean, it's like a Famicom or a PC Engine controller, minus having any start and select buttons. So, very simple controller, like I said. That's really all that I have is 2 controllers, an RF lead, and the power plug, which I can't use, and the game Burning Rubber, which is the game it came with, and it's actually a pretty good looking game from what I can tell. It looks kind of like an Outrun or, you know, road rad racer, you know, simple 8-bit road racing, arcade racing style game, and it does look pretty good. And from what I've heard, there were a few good games on here, but there was a lot of bad games. The games were way more expensive than the computer versions, which were essentially the exact same game, just ported over. I've even heard that they had trouble manufacturing the cartridges, so they had a big shortage in the cartridges. So even if you bought the system and there were a few good games for it, a lot of stores couldn't get the games. So the thing was basically just doomed. It had Nintendo going against it, it had Sega, the Mega Drive released the same year. The Amstrad owners who own the computers weren't going to pay more to play the same games, and they weren't going to steal any of the market from Nintendo or Sega, who already had loyal fans, huge library of games, way more third-party publishers. This system, for the most part, only had Ocean. And Ocean made a lot of games, but, you know, you obviously weren't going to get all the other third parties who were with Nintendo to come over to this. So like I said, it was a commercial failure. It's kind of an ugly system. Compared to the Mega Drive, it's underpowered. It was an 8-bit machine when people were expecting 16-bit machines. But like I said, it was an upgrade from the NES. It was an upgrade from the Sega Master System, and it was a simple attempt for them to make one of their computers a console. So that's the Amstrad GX4000, and hopefully someday I can get it to work. But yeah, it's in great shape, it's in the box, and like I said, I'm just happy to have it in the box. It's just amazing. So thanks again to Sean for sending that, and see you guys later.